Hello, it's a SIG Node meeting, weekly SIG Node on March 2nd, 2021. Welcome everybody. Today we're missing our leads. They both have some other things to do, but I think we'll be good. We have a lot of agenda here. So first I wanted to start with regular PR statistics. So as a reminder, we have two types of statistics. We have like what we've done over the past week. And you can see that we've done a lot. We closed like 15 PRs, merged 26. It's a very big number comparing to previous weeks. I mean, bigger than usual for sure. But then we keep opening new PRs like crazy. So there are so many opened. And people working very actively. I think, I mean, I don't know, like I try to analyze and give some like one sentence description of what's going on and why it's so many, even though we're doing so much work. I think it just like we have so many small PRs now. We have like 5 cherry picks. We have for a single feature, we have structured logging with like many PRs. I think smaller PRs making statistic worse. But I hope it will get normalized. I mean, during code freeze, it will be worse. We probably will grow all the way to 30 or something. But hopefully, right after that, we will slow them down to some acceptable numbers back. Yeah, Ilana, do you want to take? Oh yeah, an announcement. Code freeze will be next Tuesday. So whatever gets into release gets there. So if you have something outstanding and you want it to be in the 121, please shout out on Slack or and make sure that you addressed all the comments in your PR or like this PR, like the PR is. By the way, another announcement. Recently, Bazel was removed from Kubernetes, so you don't need to update Bazel any longer, and it created a lot of merge like rebase PRs. So if you didn't touch your rebase since last week, likely you need to rebase it because of Bazel change. So make sure that your PR is ready before you're asking for approvals and before moving it to 121. With that, I want to move to Ilana to talk about CAP status.
Yes, and I'm not going to give a board update today. If you want to look at the SIG Node board, I recommend that you attend the CI/triage meeting, which will be tomorrow. So CAP update. Let me share my screen so I can show you what I'm talking about. Can everyone see my screen? Yes, okay.
Yep.
And I forgot to link the 121 CAP, so let me open the spreadsheet. So this is linked on the release repo page, and so this is what I'm basing my numbers off of. So according to the release team, we have 12 CAPs that are tracked for this release. 9 are sort of on track, but 3 are currently at risk. So I just wanted to call out the 3 that were at risk. So one of them we have on the agenda for today, so I'm assuming we're going to talk about it. But one is the CRI log rotation. One is the kubelet credential provider, which is in concert with SIG Cloud Provider, and the other is downward API support for huge pages. So for each of these, I think the issue is that we don't have any PRs currently attached to these things, but code freeze is next week. So I think this one has had PRs. They might not just be linked here. But for the other 2, I'm not sure what's going on with these. So does anybody have any questions in terms of what they need to do for their PR to not be, or for their CAP to not be at risk? I'll very quickly go over the requirements just in case people are not jumping in. So it needs to have PRs linked. So if there are code changes in Kubernetes, those need to be linked. If there are any website changes for updating the documentation, that placeholder PR needs to be created. And we need to make sure that if there are PRs up, they're not in the waiting on author state on the board. So they don't need rebase or something like that, because if that's the case, we won't be able to get them merged. So code freeze is next week. Yeah, we want to make sure that everything is on track for reviewers, and I'm certainly prioritizing review myself. So I think that's all that I had on that topic. We've got some KEPs. Keep working on them. Code freezes next week. Sounds like no questions on that. Sergey, shall I move on to the next topic?
Sure, we can. I just wanted to ask if for the critical PRs, do we have owners on the call, just to make sure that somebody is tracking it?
Which critical PRs?
The three, critical caps, like the three.
Yeah, I don't know that they're necessarily critical or anything like that. They do have owners, and it looks like Seth just added a comment to this one. So all of them do have owners, and they're just not responding currently. But I know Urvashi is on the call and has an agenda item, so maybe she can talk about this one. Then Seth just added a comment to this one, and then I'm not sure what's going on with this one. We might need to reach out to Andrew.
Yeah, this has very long-standing PR in KK repository that we just cannot manage. So, okay.
I do have one quick comment. So from SIG Windows, we have the privileged container KEP. That the implementation PR is up, but I don't think that there's a reviewer assigned to that yet.
Can you flag that in the SIG Node Slack channel, and then we'll try to find someone to do it?
Sure, I will do that in the later this morning. Thank you.
Great. Anything else on this?
Yeah, I think you and Lantau reviewed the CAP for privileged containers, so I will see if they can help with review. Okay, let's go next.
Annual report?
Annual report, yes.
Okay. So Derek, unfortunately, is out of the office today, but he asked that we bring this up. And since Dawn also has a conflict, I have volunteered to go over this since I have now done one of these for SIG instrumentation. So this is not my first rodeo. So we're doing an annual report. And there is a checklist. So if you have not read about the process, let me also, I mean, this is linked in the agenda, but let me make sure that the agenda is linked in the chat so you can follow along. So this is our annual report, and there is a template that we clone from the steering committee docs, which tell us what to do. And we basically have to go over all of these sections for our SIG. So I think one of the things we have not yet had a chance to do is pull dev stats for supporting data for these responses. But one of the requirements is to ensure that we're checking in with the SIG and then that we PR this document into our repo, and they're due next week. So this is why a bunch of these are coming up right now. So Sergey, do you want me to just walk through the sections of this file?
Maybe if you can give more context of what this report is intended for.
Yeah, sure.
And
so
who's reviewing it.
Yeah, so the reports are intended to accomplish a few things. So one is that right now we currently, so previously there was a requirement that I think we present, each SIG is supposed to present at the community meeting like 3 or 4 times a year, like quite frequently. And there aren't actually enough slots in the community meeting to do this for all of the SIGs. So steering wanted to adjust the requirements for reporting to be something that is actually achievable. So most of the SIGs currently have presentations at KubeCon, which are considered to be some of these syncs with the community. But we also wanted to ensure that, not everything is synchronous, not everything is happening at an in-person or virtual event. And so the goal of steering and having these annual reports was also to have something written down and ensure that SIGs are going over things that are necessary for good health of their organization. So the goal of this was to sort of ensure that at least once a year, we're reviewing the SIG membership, all of the owners files, all of the owners of various pieces of, like our sub projects, that kind of thing. And to ensure that we're, checking through all of the various things that we are required to do as a SIG to touch point on those things. So there are a few sections in this document. So one is operational, talking about various things that we do, files that we have. One covers membership. One covers like what we're currently working on, what our project health is. So operational sort of covers things like, what do our docs look like? What do our owners files look like? What do our meetings look like? Membership covers how we measure membership in the SIG and how we grow new members and what our contributor on-ramp looks like. And then current initiatives and project health usually relates to stuff that we're currently working on. That could be CAPs, that could be features, bug fixes, and there's certainly a section here calling out CAP work review. But also any sub-projects or working groups that we're involved with and like contributor velocity stats, that kind of thing. So are there any other questions about sort of this doc as a big overlying thing, requirement new this year? No one's jumping in. So what I will do is, so Derek has, I think, invited everybody to comment, contribute to this document, make sure that you take a look. I think it went out to the mailing list, so it should be there. And I think the hope is by tomorrow, we open a PR to add this to the repo. So if anybody has any additional comments, we can add them in that PR. But I will very briefly go through this. I think most of this operational stuff is more of just a, how do our meetings work? Is our charter up to date? How do we get updates? That kind of thing. So this doesn't necessarily require a lot of community collaboration. But the membership section is listed here. And again, this is kind of a, what's the state of our onboarding path? If you have like comments or questions about this section, please go ahead and add them. And then probably the one where we'd have the most, I think, involvement would be this
for membership section. Sorry for interrupting. For membership section, I think the biggest to do right now, as I see it, is like if you go upper, like above, there is a sub-project section. So for sub-projects, we have a list of sub-projects listed on our official page, and it consists of CRI API and this link, CRI tools, Fracti, and I wasn't even sure whether we have specific owners for specific areas. So this is something that probably need to revisit and see how healthy these contributions are and whether it's a part of this community.
Yeah. Let me open up just for reference. I have the SIG instrumentation. Where is it? Here we go. I have the SIG instrumentation annual report, and I can just show what we did for this section. I use little check marks for everything that we finished. And the doc is not loading, so that doesn't help. Which should you specifically want to look at? The sub-projects? So we have a link that we looked at there, but for the most part, we actually sort of went over this in our operational section where we went over the sub-projects correctly mapped and listed in sigs.yaml. And we actually reviewed repo by repo, the owners files, making sure that they were up to date and on track. That might be something more for Derek and Dawn to do, since I think that any changes that would need to make there, I think would need to be approved by them. So that's sort of what my other SIG did for this. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think my question would be more do we really take aggregate feedback from this sub project and whether we whether all these sub projects are active. So maybe we can just leave them here as a starting point, and then see whether we can review it one by one, and owners of this or leads of this sub projects can come in there.
Yeah, and I mean, I suspect a lot of these, there's a lot of overlap. So for example, I'm sure if we look at package kubelet or something like that, the approvers list is basically the same as the approvers list for the rest of sort of node stuff in KK. And we recently reviewed that to ensure that those folks were all active. So yeah, unfortunately, there's actually, I think, a long-standing issue, which I linked in terms of there's not really a formalization in terms of sub-projects and sub-project leadership right now. And so it's a little iffy. It's kind of like, are the approvers in the owners file active? So you can watch this issue, I guess, if you're particularly interested in that. But this is quite an old issue. I mean, this has been hanging around for 3 years, so. Any other questions on this membership section? I think I'm going to reach out to Don and Derek, because I know that our teams, I think as recorded in GitHub, like there's an org configuration for it, are a bit outdated as well. And so we might want to update those when we do this. And then, sorry, I briefly mentioned this earlier, current initiatives in project health. So Mrinal very generously added a bunch of sections here, but we still have a bunch more stuff here. I might do some work today for year-to-date caps. Although those would be for 2020 and not for 2021, because this is the 2020 annual report being shipped in 2021. Yeah, if anybody has anything to add, this is probably the section that we would be asking for contributions on, because we are a very large SIG and we don't want to miss something awesome that we've done just because it wasn't written down somewhere. So. Any other questions about the annual report?
Yeah, so unfortunately, timeline for report is pretty much the same as for code freeze. So if you have something to add, please do it as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think that, even if you don't manage to get it into the Google Doc today, you will potentially have a chance to comment on the PR, but it will be harder to add things because then whoever submits the PR will need to do it. So definitely, if you want to get something in here, sooner is better. And I think that's all for me on that. So I will stop sharing.
So next topic is about CRI container lock rotation. And Urvashi, you're up.
Yep, thanks. So I can just give a quick update on the cap. Based on the graduation criteria that we have and the status of the feature, there really won't be any code changes in KK. Just the only thing we'll do is update the feature gate from beta to GA. So I'll open a PR for that. The thing I have on agenda is that there has been an update in the graduation criteria. So there was an issue that was around that there was loss of logs during the rotation. But after getting some more info on that, it doesn't happen with CRI container runtimes. The issue they're saying is when the pod is running directly writing the logs without using containerd or Docker or prior any CRI runtime. So that should not be graduation criteria for CRI log rotation. So I have opened an update PR to update the cap. So I would like review and approve over there when possible. And then sorry, Mrinal, you wanted something?
No, go ahead. Yeah, I'll take a look.
I thought so. Okay. And then the next thing is that one of the graduation criteria is we want to get feedback from the SIG Node community that the feature is working fine with them in their own distribution production environments. So there's been no major issues in OpenShift and GKE, but we want to ensure that it works on other platforms as well. So I was wondering, what is the best way to get that feedback? Would it be through the meeting right now, or should I send an email to the mailing list to gather that?
I would say both. Definitely send an email to the mailing list because there are a lot of people who can't necessarily attend the meetings because of time zones.
All right, I'll do that then. But yeah, that's all I had. If anyone has any questions or comments.
So it also says that website documentation needed.
Yeah.
Is there some work happening, or I just missed it?
No, I will open a draft PR for that, and it's already documented. We just have to add a little more information on the flags that it has.
And probably graduate it because it'll be marked beta right now. But I think the docs freeze is later than the code freeze. So
yeah. So I'm on it. I'll get that done today.
Perfect. Thank you. Next is in place pod vertical scaling.
Yeah, hi. I think this was an item that needed the KEP that we have. We updated it. Tim has an update PR. It was mainly waiting for Derek to take a look at and see if he has any comments or changes that he would like to see. Don has already looked at it last week. It looks like Derek is not here today. If anybody else has any questions regarding that, the second PR is just a process update. The PRR section was missing when compared to when it was first created. I added that. So if anybody else has any particular comments about these changes in the first PR, the 1883, I'm happy to take questions and answer. If not, we can wait for Derek to take a look.
This is exciting. Is it scheduled for 122?
Yeah, we're trying to get to 122. It's 121 is now. We already missed that.
Yeah. If there are no comments, let's go to the next section. And maybe we will ping Derek on Slack.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you. Ilana, do you want to talk about swap?
Sure. Yeah, that's another thing that we have coming for 122. So I did a little bit of work last week looking at the various comments that were, present on the document, and I'm trying to start scoping down because 122 is going to be here sooner than we think. In order to actually get ready to have a cap ready for 122 that we can implement. So I'm trying to figure out basically what the scope for an MVP for alpha would look like. And right now I have proposed kind of as a straw proposal, the most minimum possible thing. So if people want to take a look at that and say if they think that makes sense in terms of their use cases, and the general direction of where that's heading, please comment on the doc. I am hoping probably after code freeze, but before we start the next release to have a draft cap out for that. So the more feedback I can get in terms of what we want graduation criteria and that sort of thing to look like, the better.
Yeah, Ike is on the call and he will be working on that from Google side. Ike, do you want to say hello?
Hey, Ilan. I don't know if my
Hi.
camera and voice is on, but yeah, I'm still ramping up on all the docs you prepared and trying to basically get my hands dirty on some kernel level testing and stuff. And once I'm ramped up, I'll set up a sync up meeting with you, and we can follow up from there.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks.
Is anybody else? Yeah, is anybody else working on swap? Join the party. I'm really excited about 122. There will be so many improvements, features. Okay, Jim talking about container runtime kubelet under a different mount namespace.
Hi there. This is a last minute addition. Renal suggested that I pop in and just introduce this idea real quick. I think that I'd like to make it a KEP, and this is kind of coming from OpenShift. I'm new at Red Hat and getting involved in some OpenShift development. So basically, the root of why we want to do this is that systemd does not act well in an environment where there are a huge number of mount points. And one thing we can do is potentially fix systemd, although I think there are various reasons why that's sort of a longer term solution. In the short term, I've done some investigation and a proof of concept where basically I've moved both kubelet and the container runtime, in our case cryo, but I think this should work for any container runtime, basically have systemd create a separate mount namespace that is a slave to the host OS namespace, execute both cryo and kubelet inside of that mount namespace, and then all the mounts, anything that's mounted by cryo or kubelet or the containers themselves, if they have bidirectional host mounts set up, anything like that is segregated to this separate mount namespace. The host OS never sees it. So you get kind of a nice separation of domains where the mounts that are owned by the host stay in the host namespace. They're still propagated down, so they're visible to the containers and the container runtime and kubelet. But the other direction doesn't happen. And the reason that I wanted to sort of bring this to the larger community was really to try and get an idea of if there is some sort of important use case that I'm missing where the host OS really wants to see these mount points. Because in my proof of concept, basically anything that OpenShift seems to want to do with these mounts doesn't seem to break with this. The only thing that's broken so far is one Kubernetes test that specifically is testing that the mounts are available to the host OS. Everything else seems to function properly. All the CSI storage stuff seems to work fine. The mount propagation, where a container mounts something and it is intended to be consumable by a different container, that still functions because the mounts still propagate up to the mount namespace where the container runtime is running, and then from there back down to all of the actual containers that have asked to make that visible to them. And so that's kind of where I'm coming at from, and I guess I'm just curious if there's anything that immediately piques your interest of this can't happen for a specific reason, or if this is something I should continue to pursue, or just that I'd start the discussion.
Thanks, Jim. So I think like folks, we are really looking for feedback. Like if you can think of a use case that immediately breaks that, hey, you can't do this because so-and-so won't work, then please let us know. Otherwise, like we'll try to open up a cap and try to get this separation in the system. So I think, Jim, the other place we may want to get feedback is from SIG storage. So maybe you can add an agenda to their call. We can try to attend that. And
Sure.
then also send an email to the mailing list, like SIG Node, SIG storage users, and so on.
Sure. Yeah. I'll try and sort of formalize this a little bit. I've kind of have like a more formal OpenShift enhancement proposal in the works, but in some ways trying to figure out how to adapt this to KEP when it's a little bit more nebulous. It's more about sort of adjusting the expectations of the environment where Kubernetes runs than an actual, code change.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that could potentially be very disruptive in terms of like what it would look like to deploy Kube for end users. So I would definitely say that's the sort of thing that I would almost suggest, like get a straw proposal together and send it to KDev for feedback, like not just the node mailing list.
And
Sure.
I missed the motivation part. Sorry, you probably started with it, but then I concentrated on like what exactly you did. But what is like first and like key motivation for the separation?
The motivation, the original motivation was to segregate the mount points so that systemd doesn't see them, because systemd really gets bogged down. It consumes a lot more CPU when there's a large number of mount points on a system. And that was sort of the key motivation that started this whole investigation.
And there's another part there too, like systemd will need some kernel changes to be able to do that more efficiently. So instead of having to parse the full mount info file, like some patches are being discussed in the kernel, so you just get updates to the mount table. So you don't have to keep on parsing the entire mount info. So I think like maybe if we can share both of those bugs, that'll be useful as well.
Yeah, certainly.
And just a quick question, I'm curious, what is systemd doing today with those mount points? Like, why is it parsing all of them?
It seems to be just what systemd does is when it sees mount points, it sort of continually scans and rescans them. I don't know a lot about exactly why it does so. I haven't looked that deeply into the underlying defect of why. But I mean, just as an example, on an OpenShift system that I have where I've got my proofs of concept running, basically the systemd CPU utilization on a fairly small system it's sitting at around 10% of CPU and of a single CPU. And then when I move all these mount points down, it drops to 0 or effectively 0. So, I mean, and the amount that systemd consumes really does scale up with the number of mount points. So with a larger number of, containers and other mount points, it can make a very large difference in the amount of CPU consumed by systemd.
Got it.
I think that's a good point, though, David. I think, like Jim, we would also want to get a clear explanation for why systemd is doing that and what is it used for in systemd.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think to a comment from a little bit earlier, I think this would not necessarily have to be when you deploy Kubernetes, you must put these elements in their own separate mount namespace. I think a more conservative initial approach would be you would be allowed to put these, because right now there's a specific test in kubelet that ensures that you must be able to see the mount points from the host OS's perspective. And there's some documentation around like the volume mount propagation element that is specifically talking about if you mark it as bidirectional, the host OS can see these. And this would be basically relaxing that restriction so that if you, when you deploy Kubernetes so choose, you could put your container runtime and kubelet into a separate mount namespace. And if you do so, things will still work within that ecosystem, except that the host OS won't see those mounts. And so it wouldn't necessarily need to be a burden on end users when they do the installation, but it would be an option if there is a benefit to them doing so. And in OpenShift, there seems to be benefit to doing so. And more widely, I mean, users on their own would be able to make that determination, I guess.
Yeah, so talking about feature flags. Yeah, definitely. We can start with the feature flags.
Yeah, and really this is, I mean, the way that this would be implemented from the perspective of Kubernetes itself, there wouldn't be, other than changing the nature of the test so it's aware if it's whether it's running in one mode or the other mode, it's really it's when you deploy it and you set up your systemd units to start kubelet and your container runtime, you do this extra step to get those into their own separate mount namespace. It's really not, it's more environmental and around the environment in which Kubernetes is running and less about Kubernetes itself. So it's kind of weird in that way.
Yeah. Anybody on the call has immediate reaction to this? I personally don't. So
yeah, I think so. That's the thing. Like we can't immediately think of anything, but we want to make sure that we are not missing anything. Hence, we want to present it to the wider community. Thanks, Jim.
Awesome.
I guess we can follow up with the next steps.
Thanks so much.
Okay. We went through all agenda. Is there any last minute items you want to talk about? Okay, then happy Tuesday and happy rest of your week. This will be hard week because of code freeze is coming. So please make sure you did what you wanted for 1.21 release. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye, folks.